This photograph is beautiful, but as a painting, the composition simply doesn't work. So in this video, I'm going to take this real landscape with castle ruins and completely rethink it as an illustration, changing the composition, the scale, the atmosphere, and even the number of castles in the scene. And while I paint, I want to talk about why medieval ruins have fascinated artists for centuries and why they still inspire me now. Hello, art lovers! Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy historical art, painting processes, and medieval inspiration, I'd love it if you follow along and subscribe. I share videos like this regularly, where painting and history come together. Now let's begin. The first thing I do is simplify the image to sketch. The original photo works very well as a photograph because the atmosphere is already there. But when I look at it as a painting, I immediately feel that the composition is too centered and too passive. There isn't enough tension, and that's where something like the rule of thirds becomes useful. By moving the visual focus away from the exact center, I can start turning the image from a record of a place into a more intentional composition, one that guides the eyes and builds narrative. This is one of the most important differences between using a photograph and making an illustration. A photo can simply capture something, but a painting has to organize it. I always begin with the sky. In landscape painting, the sky sets the emotional tone before anything else exists. And for the medieval ruins, I almost always prefer to begin with a restrained color. So here I keep the tones muted, pale blues, soft grays, a little warm near the horizon, but not too intense. Next, I start adding the distant mountains. These have to stay soft and understated. If I make them too dark or too saturated now, they'll come forward and flatten the whole landscape. Distance in painting is often created not by adding detail, but by withholding it. Then we can begin with the hill that will eventually support the castle. This stage is mostly about structure and value. I'm blocking in the land with muted greens and earthly stones, keeping everything very simple. What interests me here is the relationship between the castle and the hill. Medieval castles were not placed randomly. They were built where the terrain already offered advantage, on elevated ground, on promontories, on difficult slopes. That's one reason ruins feel so convincing in a landscape painting. They don't just occupy the landscape, they belong to it. They seem to grow from the rock itself at times. And that fusion of architecture and geography is one of the things I find more beautiful about medieval castle. As I move closer to the foreground, I let the color become a little warmer and more saturated. This is where the painting begins to breathe. The distant shapes remain quiet, but here I can introduce more life, clearer greens, touches of ochre, slightly more contrast. That shift is what helps the space to open up. At this stage, I'm thinking in larger masses, not details, especially when now I can finally begin building the castle itself. And I'm doing it in separated layers, which is very important for the way I work digitally. Layering gives me freedom. It lets me experiment, repaint, and rethink. That flexibility matters because the medieval ruins are one of those subjects where scale changes everything. And that choice affects the entire painting. Now, at this stage of the painting, I realize something important. The painting is working, but still feels too polite. The castle is there, but it doesn't have enough presence. So, this is the moment where I make much bolder composition decisions. I make the castle significantly larger, and this changes everything. It stops being a landscape with ruins and becomes much more clearly a painting about the ruins themselves. And this is one of the most interesting parts of working from reference, recognizing when fidelity to the source is actually weakening the image. Sometimes the original place is beautiful, but the painting needs a stronger idea. And this is what's happening here. That is part of what still makes them so compelling in ruins. Even when broken, they continue to project this strength. Ruined castle is a strange thing. It's both defeated and enduring at the same time. And that tension is incredibly inspiring to paint. I believe this is exactly why so many 19th century artists became fascinated with ruined architecture. During the Romantic period, painters and writers were deeply drawn to medieval ruins because they saw in them something modern society was losing, like memory, spirituality, melancholy, and a relationship with time that felt deeper than the ordinary life. A ruined abbey or a broken tower, um, these kind of things were not just historical objects, they were symbols of passing civilizations. They suggested the smallness of human ambition. I like artists like Caspar David Friedrich when he was painting these ruins, not simply because they were old, but because they seemed like to carry emotional trust. And I think that tradition still shapes the way we look at castles now. Even today, a ruin almost never feels neutral. Even at certain point, the composition felt like it needed another point of balance. So I pushed the main castle even further, and then I introduced a second distant castle in the background. This is not copied literally from the original reference, it's a compositional invention, but it helps in two important ways. First, it creates a visual counterweight, so the painting feels more stable. And second, it suggests a wider medieval world beyond the immediate scene. And this matters to the storytelling. then finally, you can see how I play with the different layers of paintings. I always like to show this because it reveals something important. Painting, it's not a straight line, it's like a conversation. You try one idea, then another. You adjust the scale, you change the structure, you lose things and find better ones. And finally, the painting arrives somewhere that the original photograph could not have taken on its own. The ruins have inspired artists for centuries because they hold two different kinds of time at once. They belong to the past, but they remain alive in the imagination. That was true for Romantic painters in the 19th century, and it's still true for me now. When I paint a ruined castle, I'm not only painting stone, I'm painting memory, distance, and a strange beauty of the things that outlast their old. Thank you so much for being here. And if you enjoyed this journey through a medieval landscape, history, and painting, don't forget to follow and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I would love to have you here for the next one. See you in the next video.